Hey, Mickey. Hi, Mickey. You notice that things are a little different around here now. Bob's not here. I'm sorry to say, sometimes in the course of developing a business, you need to change the model. Some people don't quite work out. We brought in some consultants, and the focus groups just didn't like Bob. The fake deadpan, the exquisite oversensitivity to anything that might offend people who might become terrorists, the reverence for the United Nations, and the constant call for intrusive arms inspections. They just didn't sell. So, like Nick Denton and Gawker, we've made some changes, and I don't have to deal with Bob anymore. So, actually, Bob is having routine medical exam. He'll be back, but now on a holiday weekend when nobody's watching, I thought I'd experiment with a monologue. It may be a disaster. All I promise is I'll try to talk really fast, and it will go quickly. I've come back from an East Coast trip, saw United 93, belatedly saw United 93. The main take-home lesson of United 93 was, for a good part of the movie, the people in it, and this is apparently based on real events, are looking for President Bush because they want permission to shoot down the plane if it comes close to the Capitol. And of course, we know that for a few minutes at least, Bush was reading or listening to kids read My Pet Goat, and the film sort of makes Michael Moore's point for him. I hated to say that, and maybe the director was tweaking it in an anti-Bush direction, but geez, it really was stupid to spend all that time reading My Pet Goat. What can you say? Second, had a lot of conversations about John McCain. Has McCain blown the Republican nomination by being so liberal on immigration? The obvious answer is no, thanks to the filer faster principle. He has plenty of time to recover. He especially has plenty of time to recover if he stops right now this constant self-righteous hectoring on behalf of legalization. But I think he even has time to recover if he stops it after the midterms. Also had a lot of talk about Marcos Melitsas, Kos. I learned that my crude view of Kos is that he's the guy who decided the Democrats don't need any rethinking at all. They can accept Democratic Party policies, liberalism as they've existed. Democrats don't need to do any rethinking. They just need to be angrier and nastier. It's a little more complicated than that, apparently. I've read parts of his book. He does attack the Democratic splintering into special interests, but he's a progressive, but he doesn't really define what he means by progressivism. Does he mean welfare? Does he mean more union power? Does he mean affirmative action? It's not clear he's willing to do any rethinking at all, and at least part of politics is substance. Maybe the Democrats have been wrong about some things, and maybe they should concede that and change it. Maybe they'd be more appealing. That does not seem to be in his arsenal of weapons. But the interesting things I learned back east was, first, he's sort of preparing some sort of libertarian manifesto. So that could be interesting. There may be some substance there, some substantive rethinking he wants to do. So I admit, maybe I oversimplified in my visceral distaste for the guy. Second, the Kos people seem to be cutting Jerome Armstrong loose a bit. I mean, they'll defend Kos. They don't seem to want to defend Jerome Armstrong. He's the guy who A, believes in astrology, B, has signed a consent decree with the SEC for allegedly touting a worthless stock on the internet, which does resonate with his current role of touting politicians on the internet. Rogers Cadenhead, a man of the left who nevertheless is on Kos's case, has a post up about one of the Cossacks saying that, well, you should really support bloggers because if you don't support bloggers, don't count on us to shut up when you want us to shut up. And Cadenhead paraphrases this plea as pay up if you expect us to shut up when you screw up. Rogers Cadenhead is still one of the go-to sites for the Cazzola controversy. Dan Reel has a blog up. He thinks that Armstrong did not abandon astrology as early as he implies. He implies he tapered off after 2001, but there's some postings under a pseudonym that people think are Jerome Armstrong. He may have continued it until as recently as 2005. We expect more from Dan Reel, so watch that site. The American Thinker has an interesting but ultimately absurd blog post about suggesting that there's a big MSM conspiracy not to take the Kos scandal too far. There's some hilarious quotes from Howie Kurtz poo-pooing the scandal, referring to Armstrong's SEC plea as a, quote, related matter. Well, it's much more interesting if you say what the related matter is, Howie. So that's the summary of my trip. Next, sorry, I'm ringing the bell here on myself. Next, we have a feature called Mickey is Stupid, where I'm baffled and dumbfounded and bemused by recent events, perhaps in a constructive, perhaps in an unconstructive way. One thing I'm stupid about is the YouTube NBC deal. I thought the whole deal with YouTube was that it was a guerrilla operation where people posted video that they wanted to see, and people gravitated to it sort of in some sort of democratic, unorganized fashion. Now they've signed some deal with NBC, described in the Wall Street Journal as, with today's agreement, NBC seeks to promote its shows to YouTube's audience while getting assurances that material it doesn't want on the site will be removed. So they have to show the promotional crap that NBC wants to give them, and they have to take down the interesting crap that NBC doesn't want it to see. That sounds like a recipe for turning themselves into a PR firm. What am I missing here? And will they also disfavor interesting crap from ABC and CBS because NBC is now their paymaster? I smell corruption again. The GM Renault deal, which is pushed by Kirk Kerkorian, a minority investor in GM, but also a huge minority investor in GM. He wants GM to form an alliance with Renault and Nissan. Mainly, he seems to want to get Carlos Ghosn, who revived Nissan and has now moved to head Renault, to head all of GM. Quick question. Are Renault's good cars? I don't think so. I think they're shitty cars. I think when Renault took over Jeep and Chrysler a couple decades ago, Jeeps became really junky. And there's still some Renault DNA in Jeeps, and they're trying desperately to get it out. So why would GM want to merge with this junky car company whose cars have never sold in the United States and get more Renault DNA in GM cars? GM struggled mightily to make their cars better. They made some headway. This seems like a disaster. The Wall Street Journal points out these mergers never develop the synergies they're supposed to. And what if Carlos Ghosn dies? I mean, this whole deal seems to be designed to get one man. It reminds me of the time Warner Brothers, I think it was Warner Brothers, sold a huge plot of land. Sony sold a huge plot of land just so it could get Peters and Goober as executives. Well, they were gone as executives in a few years, and Sony didn't have a huge plot of land. You don't want to sell the store just for one guy. It seems insane. Okay, I'm stupid about that too. Another new feature. Mickey alone with the moose. Here's a moose point, and the moose is, in case you haven't followed the New York Times, the moose is Pinch Sulzberger's symbol for unpleasant truths that are in the room that nobody's dealing with. Immigration reform. I wrote a blog post saying that, well, the pro-border control people should throw Senator Specter a bone by agreeing to discuss legalization further down the road after passing a border-only, enforcement-only House-style bill. I'm having second thoughts about that, and here's why. People say, well, if the Congress doesn't do anything this year, that just preserves the status quo. Well, it doesn't preserve the status quo, and here's why. In the status quo, the idea that the United States is about to grant legalization or amnesty is still alive. People still believe it in Latin America. They still come here in order to take advantage of what they perceive as the pending amnesty. If nothing happens this year, and if the bills are killed in the right way, it will kill the amnesty idea dead. And the moose point is, we need to kill the amnesty idea dead, dead, dead. If we're going to enforce our borders, we have to remove that motive for people to come here illegally. We also have to remove the economic motive of jobs, and we also have to have more physical control of the borders. But you need all three. So if Congress agrees to, well, in 5 years, once the borders are certified as secure, we will have legalization, that doesn't kill the idea dead. In fact, maybe after we kill the idea dead, then a few years down the road, if the borders are secure, we can actually have legalization. But first things first. First, you have to disabuse people of the idea and show potential immigrants that the United States means business before you can come back and do something to grandfather and the people who've been here for 20 years. So that's why all the talk in Washington about phased implementation of some comprehensive bill doesn't make sense, because if we say 5 years down the road we're going to have legalization, that doesn't kill the amnesty idea dead, and you need to kill the amnesty idea dead. There was a special election in Utah where the most anti-Bush, anti-legalization candidate lost 55 to 45 against a Republican. It's very tempting to see this as the bookend to the special election in California where the pro-enforcement candidate won. And I've been looking for a reason to deny this obvious symmetry. In both, the favorite candidate beat off a challenger. In California, we learned there wasn't going to be such a big pro-democratic wave that it could beat an entrenched Republican. In Utah, we learned there wasn't going to be such a big anti-illegal immigrant wave that it was going to boot out an entrenched Republican. But there is a difference. The difference is in Utah, the candidate who won, the entrenched Republican who actually supports Bush's bill, didn't run on the platform of supporting Bush's bill. In fact, quite the opposite. He ran as an anti-immigrant candidate. So it's hard to paint this as a victory for Bush's immigration plan. Here's Congressman Cannon's ad. What Chris Cannon does in Washington matters to Utah. It matters that Chris Cannon is fighting to pass a law to strengthen our borders and toughen penalties on illegal immigration. That doesn't sound like pro-legalization or pro-McCain Kennedy. Here's a second ad. I'm Congressman Chris Cannon, and I approve this message. Female announcer. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. But Congressman Chris Cannon says only if they come here legally. That's why Chris Cannon is fighting to pass legislation to strengthen our borders and toughen penalties on illegal immigration. And why Chris Cannon would require all immigrants to carry tamper-proof ID cards or be deported. Fighting to stop illegal immigration. Re-elect Congressman Chris Cannon. So the guy was running against illegal immigration. It's not a victory for the pro-legalization forces, which is why I don't think it'll have the impact in toughening opposition to Bush's legalization plan that I don't think it will soften that opposition in the same way that the California special election toughened that opposition. So that's my moose point for the day. The final segment, and this is going to be short, I promise short, is Bob's Not Here. And because Bob's not here, I can answer some of his arguments without fear of being contradicted. And I'm going to take full advantage of that. The specific example I want to bring up is last week he attacked something Ann Coulter said about offense against Muslims just being an excuse for Muslims to go back to their default position, which is rioting and setting things on fire, or something like that. We can play the clip. We can certainly link to the clip. And maybe we'll even play the clip if we have the technical prowess. But my point is, I disagree with that. I disagree with what Coulter says. I think Muslims riot claiming offense to Islam because they're genuinely offended usually. That doesn't solve the problem of should you go ahead and offend them, but it does. I disagree with her premise that they sort of are rioting for fun and profit, as Edward Banfield once said about urban riots. But I think you gotta let people say that. I mean, we don't want my reaction after reviewing that segment with Bob is, you know, if the world is as Bob wants it to be and we can't say these things, when do we have the real conversation where people talk about what they actually want to talk about in the way that they actually talk about them? We can't have it in public if Bob has his way. We can't have people say, well, Muslims just like to riot, and have other people say, no, you're full of it, and have the truth come out in the way the First Amendment says it's supposed to come out through a public debate. It'll happen in the back rooms where the negative portrayals of Muslims are never challenged. I'd rather have a society where everything's out in public, where you say nasty things about Muslims, where you say nasty things about Catholics, where you say nasty things about all races, creeds, religions, the way people talk in ordinary conversation that's countered by more speech, and the truth comes out in the end. And people feel free to participate without fear of offending PC referees. Let's not use the word commissars. Referees like Bob. There'll always be some private some things you can only say in private, but I think we want to keep that sphere small and the public sphere of discourse large, which is why I think you have to let people like Coulter say what she has to say, which is sometimes right, sometimes wrong, often wrong, without saying that they have to be shamed back into the shadows. Let's bring them out of the shadows, I say. And that's it. This may be a failure. We may look back and say, yeah, they tried monologues once and they were a disaster. We may look back and say, other people made monologues work, but Kaus didn't. You may look back and say, Kaus's monologues were primitive and involved him just talking to a camera without the technical sophistication that Blogging Heads TV later developed. But you don't have to worry because Bob will be back soon. Good talking with you. See you later.